I'm dropping my shoulder bag into an open cubby. I'm being given instructions to touch nothing, and that I will be given 60 seconds. I'm standing on the threshold of infinity at the Art Gallery of Ontario. Behind me, a crowd buzzing with the same anticipation as if we were about to meet a celebrity or catch a glimpse of a royal exiting the palace. Inside that small room, just 60 seconds of time, give or take, is one of the most famous art experiences on the planet. Yayoi Kusama's Infinity Room lets survive forever. And for one shimmering minute, we each step inside infinity. Welcome to Lattes Art, presented by J Squared Atelier. I'm James William Moore, artist, curator, and lover of all things messy. And today, we're exploring the divine mess behind the masterpiece of Yayoi Kusama. Standing in that mirrored room, I thought infinity would feel grand, like galaxies or gods. But it didn't. It felt human. Every reflection was another me, blinking, breathing, wondering if the next reflection knew more than I did. The lights floated like thoughts I'd forgotten to finish. The silver balls weren't planets or stars, they were ideas. Small, fragile, and somehow eternal. I realized infinity isn't out there. It's right here, in repetition, in the faces we show the world, in the echoes of our own light bouncing back at us. Maybe that's what Kusama meant all along, that forever isn't some unreachable distance. It's the endless act of seeing ourselves again and again, until we finally understand that we were never just one version to begin with. And in that moment, it struck me. This wasn't just a beautiful Instagram backdrop. This was a visual diary of obsession, fear, and survival. Yayoi Kusama was born in 1929 in Matsumoto, Japan, the youngest daughter of a conservative, upper-middle-class family that sold seeds and plants for a living. You'd think being surrounded by flowers would be idyllic, but for Kusama, it was complicated. Her mother was controlling and disapproved of her art making. Her father was unfaithful and often absent. The child who would later fill rooms with infinite reflections was rarely allowed to look at herself. When Kusama began seeing hallucinations, waves of dots that covered everything, even her own body, she was told to hide it, to suppress it. But she didn't. She turned it into art. She said, "One day I was looking at a pattern of red flowers on a tablecloth, and when I looked up, the ceiling, the windows, the whole room, my own body, all were covered in the same pattern. I felt myself being obliterated." That word, obliteration, would come to define her life's work. Most would see that as terrifying. Kusama saw it as material, as survival. She once said, "I fight pain, anxiety, and fear every day. And the only method I have found that relieves my illness is to keep creating art." Her dots, her infinity, were her medicine. In 1958, she left Japan behind, against her family's wishes, and moved to New York. She arrived with almost nothing but hundreds of watercolor paintings, some sewn together into massive patchworks of obsessive marks. She found herself in a male-dominated scene exploding with abstract expressionism and pop art. Pollock was the mythic drunk genius, Rothko the tortured philosopher, Warhol the rising provocateur. Kusama didn't fit the mold. A Japanese woman, self-taught, poor, and speaking little English. But she worked relentlessly. She covered entire rooms in nets and dots until they seemed to vibrate. She turned her hallucinations into environments, physical manifestations of psychological repetition. Her early infinity net paintings, delicate white arcs repeated endlessly across vast canvases, hypnotized viewers and critics alike. Donald Judd, later a minimalist icon, was one of her earliest supporters. But fame is fickle, especially for women of color in the 1960s art world. Her male contemporaries, Warhol, Oldenburg, Lucas Samiras, and others, borrowed freely from her ideas, sometimes echoing them almost exactly. Kusama staged nude happenings and polka dot protests against the Vietnam War, covering participants in dots to symbolize unity and obliteration. She built mirrored chambers and soft sculptures years before immersive art became the billion-dollar industry it is today. The very repetition that defined her art also defined her struggle, a cycle of creation and erasure, of being seen and forgotten. Yayoi Kusama's mirrors weren't about vanity. They were about survival, a way to multiply herself so she couldn't be erased again. By the late 1960s, the brilliance that had fueled Kusama's rise began to fracture. The same obsessive drive that made her paint thousands of nets and fill rooms with mirrored spheres was consuming her from the inside. Her hallucinations intensified. The dots that had once been her allies, her way of organizing chaos, began to overwhelm her again. She was showing constantly in New York, staging performances, building environments, pushing the limits of what art could be. But the strain of it all, the noise, the competition, the invisibility, was unbearable. Kusama began writing obsessively. Her poems and novels read like dispatches from a mind circling infinity, full of repetition, beauty, and dread. She published Manhattan Suicide Addict in 1978, a surreal and haunting semi-autobiography about isolation and desire in the city that had forgotten her. Her art and her psyche had become indistinguishable, both infinite, both fragile. And as the art world shifted towards minimalism and conceptualism, Kusama, who had pioneered immersive art before it had a name, slipped into obscurity. Critics dismissed her. Dealers moved on. The woman who once covered entire rooms in dots suddenly disappeared from the art world's radar. In 1977, Kusama made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She voluntarily admitted herself to a psychiatric hospital in Tokyo, seeking peace from the noise of her mind. It wasn't retreat, it was a reclamation, a space to breathe, to exist, to create on her own terms. Since then, her life has followed a steady rhythm. Each morning, she leaves her small room in the hospital, crosses the street to her studio, and begins again. Each night, she returns to that same quiet room. Art and rest, obsession and relief, creation and confinement. That's the paradox, the divine mess, behind the infinity mirror rooms. They look like freedom. They feel like transcendence. but they were born from solitude. Her art is both therapy and trap, an endless repetition meant to quiet the mind, but one that also reflects its chaos back at her. In the 1980s and early 90s, something remarkable happened. The world began to look for her again. A new generation of artists and curators, many of them women and people of color, rediscovered Kusama's radical legacy. They saw her for what she truly was, a pioneer who redefined what art could be: participatory, psychological, deeply personal. Major retrospectives in Japan and later in the United States reignited her career. She represented Japan at the Venice Biennale with a mirrored room, bright, funny, obsessive, and somehow heartbreaking. Audiences were mesmerized. Critics finally caught up. Kusama, now in her 60s, had outlasted them all. And then the infinity mirror rooms, once quiet meditations on obliteration, became global icons. Museums around the world clamored to exhibit them. Crowds lined up for hours just to spend 60 seconds inside. For many, it was their first real encounter with contemporary art. For Kusama, it was proof that the work she made to save herself had finally saved her career too. But even in fame, she remained grounded in her routine: hospital, studio, creation, reflection. While the world posted selfies under mirrored lights, Kusama kept painting dots, writing poetry, and whispering to infinity. There's something poetic about that. The artist who spent her life trying to dissolve herself into her art, becoming one of the most recognizable living artists in the world. The woman who feared vanishing became impossible to ignore. Her mirrors are still doing what they were meant to do, reflecting us back at ourselves, reminding us that beauty and madness, confinement and freedom, repetition and release are often the same thing from different angles. Yayoi Kusama didn't escape her mind. She made it infinite. When you step into one of Kusama's mirror rooms today, you'll notice something else. People immediately take out their phones. They photograph themselves inside infinity. I'm guilty of it, as seen by the images shared for this episode. And honestly, I get it. It's irresistible. But it also says something about us. Kusama's work was about the fear of disappearing, about obliterating the self into pattern, repetition, nothingness. And here we are, 70 years later, photographing ourselves endlessly so we won't disappear. Maybe that's the mirror we're really looking into. It's easy to see Kusama as the eccentric dot lady, the one with the red wig and pumpkin sculptures. But behind the spectacle is a woman who turned trauma into light, who used obsession as language, who painted her way through hallucinations to build universes that now hold millions of us for 1 minute at a time. The divine? The beauty, the awe, the transcendence. The mess? The pain that made it possible. When I stepped out of Kusama's infinity room, Let's Survive Together, I thought I'd be leaving infinity behind. But maybe we never do. Maybe the mirrors stay inside of us, reflecting all of the pieces of who we've been and who we're still becoming. This balance of beauty and chaos is what I call the divine mess behind the masterpiece. Because in art, just like in life, the mess always makes it interesting. As the 60 seconds concludes and our images fade from the mirrors, we step back from Kusama's infinite world, still seeing echoes of ourselves scattered across the glass. Her story reminds us that art isn't always about perfection or peace. Sometimes it's about holding chaos close enough to turn it into beauty. That's the divine mess, the space where creation and confusion, madness and magic coexist. And that's exactly where we're headed next. I'm thrilled to share that this episode marks the launch of a brand new weekly series, Art Happens, the Divine Mess of Art History, presented by J2 Atelier. Your quick dose of curiosity, chaos, and creative brilliance from the past and present of the art world. Each week, we'll dive into short, fascinating stories from stolen masterpieces to defiant artists, forgotten muses, and the strange, beautiful accidents that shape art history. Art Happens drops its premiere episode on December 1st. So if you've ever wondered how art really happens, join me there. Because perfection's overrated, and the divine mess, that's where the magic lives. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Lattes Art, presented by J2 Atelier. If Kusama taught us anything, it's that even in repetition, there's renewal. That art isn't about escaping our reflections, but learning to live with them. Thank you for joining me on this journey through infinity and introspection. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow, rate, and share Lattes Art wherever you listen. It helps others discover the show and keeps our creative conversations brewing. And don't forget, follow our new show, Art Happens, the Divine Mess of Art History, presented by J2 Atelier. It's your quick sip of art history each week. Short, fascinating stories about the masterpieces, the mishaps, and the moments that change the way we see art. Follow Art Happens now and join me for a fresh dose of creative chaos every week. Until next time, I'm your host, James William Moore. Keep creating, keep questioning, and as always, keep finding the art in every day.